Why was she always the one sitting apart at the briefing table? The question had followed her through every command post, every barracks, every mission room she'd ever entered. Eyes on her but never seeing her. Respect perhaps for the record she carried, but also suspicion, distrust. A woman in a world where men had written the rules long before she arrived. Now, years later, she had traded steel-gray war rooms for silence. The Colorado River carried her secret, its surface calm in the dim wash of dawn. She stood alone on the warped planks of a private dock, auburn hair pulled back in a simple braid, her figure framed against the mist rising off the water. Locals thought she was just another quiet transplant who wanted to vanish into a small town. A wildlife photographer, they called her, the kind who lived in a rented cabin, hiked the ridges, and sold the occasional landscape print online. But her mornings betrayed her. At 4:30, before the first hint of sunlight, she walked the perimeter of her property. She brewed coffee so dark it could have passed for jet fuel, and then she came down here to the river. She didn't fish. She just stood with her boots balanced on the slick boards, eyes tracing the current as if she expected the water to speak back. Old habits died hard. Rachel Harper had once been more than just another name on a roster. She had been an ONI asset, Office of Naval Intelligence, trained to disappear, to listen, to strike when silence demanded it. But the work had left scars deeper than the ones on her body. A brother lost in Helmand Province. Teammates burned alive in a trap she'd barely escaped. And a betrayal that still gnawed at the marrow of her bones. She had walked away before the Navy could push her out. Officially, she was on indefinite leave. In truth, she was a ghost. And ghosts didn't come back, not unless something forced them. That morning, something did. Through the fog, she noticed it movement across the riverbank. Subtle but sharp. Not the clumsy shuffle of a deer, not the aimless sway of branches in the breeze. Someone was there, someone watching. Her hand brushed against the Glock resting in the small of her back. Her pulse didn't race, it slowed, measured, breath in, breath out. But when she looked again, the figure was gone. By 700, she forced herself into town, to Mabel's diner, where gossip spread faster than wildfire across tinderbrush. She sat in a corner booth, map unfolded across the table, tracing trails with her finger while her coffee went cold. She wanted them to notice her, not the waitress, not the retired ranchers, him. And he did. Richard Coleman walked in like he owned the place. Silver hair, designer boots, the kind of man who smiled with his mouth but never with his eyes. To the diner crowd, he was just another developer, an investor promising jobs and a new resort at the South Bend. To her, he was something else entirely. She knew that face. The photographs had aged, the jaw had softened, but the eyes were exactly the same. Marcus Blackwood. The man who had betrayed her brother's team in Helmand. The man who had disappeared with $15 million and an NOC list that had cost good operators their lives. No body had ever been found. Some had whispered he was dead, but Rachel knew better. She, hunted too long, pieced together too many whispers across too many continents. Now he was here, in River Point, a small Arizona town that barely existed on a map. Why here, why now? She didn't approach him. Not yet. Instead, she marked every detail, the way he scanned the room, the men he brought with him, the watch on his wrist. The small tells that gave away what he was pretending to be and what he really was. For 3 days she watched. Hiking the ridges, camera slung around her neck, she moved like a shadow along the overlooks above South Bend. Below, Blackwood's development company set up trailers, equipment, patrols that were far too disciplined for civilian contractors. The men carried themselves with the same posture she had once drilled into young recruits. Eastern European by their gait. Former Spetsnaz, maybe. Ex-Special Forces, certainly. On the 4th morning, Rachel crouched behind a ridge, camera lens trained on the site. Her finger tapped against the shutter but didn't press. She wasn't collecting landscapes. She was counting guards, logging rotations, watching where Coleman, no, Blackwood, emerged and where he disappeared. She buried her cigarette butts carefully beneath the dirt, but still she felt exposed, observed. That evening, as she returned to her cabin, the feeling sharpened. Her perimeter wires had been shifted, not broken, shifted. Someone had been here. Inside, her table lamp still glowed. A laptop open to encrypted files, her Glock beside it. She froze. Something in the air told her not to move further. Then the boards outside creaked. In a fluid motion, she killed the lamp, drew her weapon, and vanished into the dark. Silence pressed against her ears, broken only by the faint rustle of boots against pine needles. She didn't wait. She moved behind him, barrel pressing into the nape of his neck before his breath could even catch. "Hands where I can see them," she said, her voice flat, steady. "And we're going to walk, slowly, inside." The man obeyed. He was good, too good, not a local, not a hunter. She'd underestimated him. That mistake tightened her grip on the Glock. Once inside, with the blinds drawn, she faced him across the dim cabin. His weapon lay disassembled on her table, stripped from him the moment they stepped through the door. He didn't flinch. He just sat, calm, watching her with eyes that were far too familiar. "Who are you?" she demanded. "Jack Harlo," he said evenly. "SEAL Team 6, or I was, a long time ago." The name hit like a pulse grenade. She knew it. Her brother had written about him, David Harper, the kid who had followed her into the Navy. He had admired Harlo, respected him, blamed himself when that Helmand mission turned into a slaughter. She studied the man in front of her. Silver hair, broad shoulders even with age, scar tissue curling down his back where a bullet had tried to end him. A ghost. "You're supposed to be dead," she said. "Officially, yeah," he answered. His eyes narrowed, reading her face like a dossier. "And you're not Catherine Reynolds, the photographer, so let's stop wasting time." Her cover cracked, but she didn't care. She pulled back her sleeve, revealing a faded tattoo along her wrist, dots and dashes, Morse code. "David." His expression shifted just slightly, recognition. "My brother," she said softly, "the one who died in Helmand, the one Blackwood betrayed." Silence stretched between them, heavy as stone. He looked away, jaw clenched against something deeper than regret. "I got him killed," he said finally. "No," Rachel answered, voice sharp, cutting through the guilt she recognized in herself. "Blackwood got him killed, and he's here, right now, hiding behind a fake name, building something that doesn't fit, and you and I both know why." Harlo didn't speak, but his silence was answer enough. He knew what she knew, something buried beneath this river, something men like Blackwood would kill for. Rachel slid the file folder across the table. Maps, satellite images, redacted reports older than both of them, a missing tactical nuclear device, W-54 SADM, lost in transport decades ago, never recovered. Blackwood hadn't come to build a resort. He had come to unearth a ghost far more dangerous than either of them. And the only question left was this: would they bury it first, or would it bury them? How much of the past could a person carry before it crushed them? Rachel wondered as she watched Harlo's expression shift, the old scars rising in his eyes before he could hide them. She had expected denial, evasion, maybe even a dismissal of her theory. Instead, he sat in silence, his broad shoulders hunched forward, hands resting on his knees like a man bracing against an unseen storm. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet. "The W-54, Special Atomic Demolition Munition, that's not a campfire story." "It isn't," she said. Her hand hovered over the faded photograph spread across the table. "The last survivor from the transport unit contacted O&I 3 months ago. He left coordinates before he died. My office buried it. Too risky, too political, I didn't." She didn't add that she had stolen the file, that she had walked out of her office, signed leave papers, and vanished, that she had chosen this hunt not as an assignment but as penance. Harlo leaned back in the chair, the wood creaking beneath his frame. "And Blackwood has the same lead." "He knows enough," she said. Not the exact coordinates, but close, close enough to start digging. The air between them thickened, a river outside, silence inside, and two ghosts chained to the same past. "Then you need help," Harlo said finally. Rachel's jaw tightened. She wanted to deny it, wanted to insist she could do it alone. But the truth was sitting in front of her, staring with eyes that had seen more death than she had. And she wasn't naive enough to think one woman could outmaneuver Marcus Blackwood and a dozen mercenaries on her own. "Why would you help me?" she asked. "Because if that thing is real, it's not just your fight." His gaze darkened. "And because Blackwood still owes me 4 lives, I plan on collecting." For the first time in years, Rachel felt something other than grief knotting in her chest, a pulse of grim purpose. She nodded once. "We do this my way, quiet, precise. No trails, no witnesses." "No arguments," Harlo said, rising from the chair. "But I'll need my people." "People," she echoed. He met her eyes. "You didn't think I survived this long without a contingency plan, did you?" The next dawn painted the river in muted gold, but Rachel barely noticed. She stood at the edge of Harlo's dock, scanning the opposite bank as her mind replayed fragments of her brother's letters. "He trusts me with things he doesn't trust anyone else with. The others call him Ghost, because no one ever sees him coming, because he disappears and reappears like the river mist." David had written those lines with admiration, pride, and she had clung to them after he died, until the ink blurred with tears and the paper grew soft from being folded too many times. Now Ghost stood beside her, older, weathered, alive. His phone pressed against his ear, voice low, clipped. She caught fragments, old call signs, codes that belonged to another life. When he hung up, he didn't smile, but the weight on his shoulders had shifted, redistributed. "They'll come," he said simply. "Who?" "Men who don't ask questions, who don't run their mouths, who don't owe Blackwood anything except a bullet." Rachel studied him. For all his caution, there was something in his tone, an almost imperceptible flicker of relief. Ghost wasn't built to live alone, no matter how much he pretended otherwise. By midday, Rachel had already memorized the terrain from Harlo's cabin to the South Bend. The ridges, the choke points, the angles of approach, every line of sight that could either save her life or end it. She had moved like this before, through desert wadis in Afghanistan, alleys in Aleppo, frozen ridgelines in Norway. But here, it felt different. This wasn't deployment, this wasn't duty, this was something else. At dusk, Harlo gestured for her to follow. They hiked to an overlook above the bend, settling into the brush. He handed her a pair of military-grade binoculars. "Count them," he said softly. Rachel adjusted the focus. 6 men visible, 2 on patrol, rifles slung low but movements precise. 4 clustered around a trailer, hauling crates from an unmarked truck. She kept counting, watching, measuring their posture, their spacing, the rhythm of their eyes. "Eastern European," she murmured. "Spetsnaz or close. See the way they pivot their rifles, old-school Russian training." Harlo nodded faintly. "Blackwood doesn't hire amateurs." Her lens drifted toward the largest trailer. Through a gap in the blinds, she glimpsed him. Blackwood, taller than she remembered from the photos. Silver hair slicked back, jacket sharp enough to belong on a runway instead of a riverbank. But the way he moved, that was unchanged. Efficient, purposeful, dangerous. Her throat tightened. "That's him." "Marcus Blackwood," Harlo said. He didn't spit the name, didn't curse. He just said it like a verdict. Rachel lowered the binoculars. "He doesn't know I'm here, not yet." "Then we keep it that way," Harlo replied, "until we're ready." Later that night, Rachel found herself packing inside Harlo's cabin. He had pulled a black case from beneath the floorboards, laying out equipment with methodical precision. Suppressed pistols, night vision goggles, communications gear, not relics, not trophies, tools. She watched his hands move, steady despite the years. A man returning to the rhythm of muscle memory. "You never really left, did you?" she asked quietly. His gaze flicked up. "You don't leave the work, not really. You just change the battlefield." Rachel leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "So what now?" "We watch, we listen, we wait." He clipped the suppressor onto a pistol, the metallic click sharp in the silence. "And when the time comes, we strike." She hesitated, then asked the question that had been pressing on her since their meeting. Why Helmond? Why did Blackwood do it? Harlo's hand stilled. His shoulders tightened, the lines of his face etched deeper in the lamplight. $15 million, he said finally, and a memory stick with names that should never have seen daylight. He sold us out, sold your brother, sold me. And when the dust cleared, he vanished. Rachel swallowed against the burn rising in her throat. She wanted to scream, wanted to shatter something. Instead, she forced her voice level. "Then this isn't just about the nuke. It's about finishing what he started." "No," Harlo corrected, meeting her eyes with a steady intensity. "It's about making sure it never finishes us." Sleep didn't come easy, not for either of them. When lightning cracked across the horizon near midnight, Rachel found herself staring at the ceiling, the sound pulling her back to Helmond, to David, to the letters she never got to answer. She sat up, pressing her palms against her eyes until stars swam in the darkness. "Don't do this," she told herself. "Don't let grief pull you under." But the river outside whispered anyway, whispered of bodies buried in water, secrets drowned but never gone. And she knew with a certainty that twisted her stomach, Blackwood wasn't just here to find the device. He was here to finish erasing every ghost he had created. The next morning brought no peace. Rachel stepped onto the dock with her coffee just as Harlo emerged from the tree line, jaw tight. "Someone's watching us," he said simply. Her pulse quickened. "Where?" He nodded toward the opposite bank. "They were there last night, same place you saw." Rachel's grip tightened on her mug. "Then they know." "Maybe," Harlo said. His voice was calm, but she caught the flicker of something else in his eyes. A calculation. A recognition of the trap tightening around them. She set the mug down. "Then we don't wait, we hit first." His expression shifted, the faintest trace of approval breaking through the stoicism. "You really are your brother's sister." And for the first time since she arrived in River Point, Rachel allowed herself the smallest smile. Not out of joy, out of resolve. Because the war she had carried inside her chest for years was no longer a memory. It was here. Who taught her how to listen to a silence and name it danger? Rachel asked herself as she tightened the strap on her pack. It was an old talent, less flashy than marksmanship but deadlier when used well. The river made its own language, a thin, constant hiss where currents met, a deeper groan where rocks scratched, a hollow that swallowed sound and kept secrets. You learned it or you drowned in it. They gathered at dawn beneath a sky the color of old metal. Harlo's cabin smelled faintly of coffee and oil. Mike Daniels arrived first, hair wild from the road, grin the same savage curve it had been in youth. Carlos Rodriguez rolled in behind him, quieter now, older, yes, but still the kind of medic who could rewrite catastrophe into survival. Chief Freeman came last, lumbering but steady, with a rucksack slung over one shoulder and the tired eyes of a man who'd always chosen to stand between trouble and others. They looked like a patchwork team, 3 veterans, 1 current ONI officer, a town sheriff who shouldn't have been in the middle of this at all. Yet under the map lights and the tinny hum of a borrowed radio, they snapped into the kind of cohesion that made enemies stay up at night. Rachel felt the old muscle memory in her shoulders as if a glove had slid back into place. It was a small comfort, and comfort now was a tool like any other. "We move in 2 waves, Harlo said, voice low and precise. "Recon first. We confirm their exit points, the layout of their trailers. We plant trackers on vehicles. We need eyes and a way to follow movement. If they start pulling gear, we'll know." Mike's laugh was short. "And then what, Ghost? We sit back and watch our rivals dig up history." "No," Rachel replied. Then we make sure history stays buried." She could feel the team watching her as she spoke. Not for her authority, she'd earned little of that here, but for the decision she carried like a hot coal. The plan was audacious because it had to be. Blackwood's people had an edge, resources, hired men who had been paid to obey without question. What they lacked was crucial knowledge of the river's secret. That secret was their leverage. They split into pairs. Harlo and Rachel took the ridge positions. Mike and Freeman would create diversions and cut off ground escape routes. Carlos would remain a ghost in Overwatch, his rifle and med kit ready in equal measure. The approach to the trailers was soft as shadow. They moved with the river at their backs and the wind in their faces, taking advantage of every rock and scrub for cover. The men down at the site were fewer than Rachel expected, perhaps a tactical choice to avoid attracting attention. Fewer shoulders to shoot from, but also fewer eyes to detect patterns. She counted, cataloged, fed the numbers like a machine, and then she caught herself remembering David's voice praising the smallest observance. "It's in the details, Harp." He'd always said it like a joke, but it had been the kind of lesson that sat in the marrow. They reached an outbuilding 30 meters from the main trailers. Harlo found a blind spot in the camera sweep and signaled. Rachel peeled away, slipping to the nearest trailer with Harlo in silent formation behind her. Heat hung off the metal like a curtain. She placed the compact surveillance device beneath the lip of the trailer's frame. It was small, clever, and would feed them real-time audio and movement data. Planting bugs was an old, intimate gesture, like leaving your handwriting in someone else's plans. Inside, the trailer smelled of diesel and cheap cologne. A man in a heavy coat sat with his boots on a folding chair, eyes on his phone. Rachel moved behind him like a thought, hand over the man's mouth for a heartbeat before the world could spike. She felt the quick, warm pulse of fear behind his ear, and then the relief when he realized he hadn't died. People who chose this life often liked to pretend they had no pulse at all. It gratified them to discover the opposite. Harlo worked with the patience of someone aligning dominoes. He planted a tracker on the truck's undercarriage, slipped a small camera beneath the trailer axle. The men were efficient, businesslike, no theatrics, no wasted motion. They left as they had entered, unseen, unreckoned, their footprints washed by the river's steady patience. Back at the ridge, the devices came alive. A faint chorus of signals filled the speaker, rustling, muted speech in a dozen languages, the clang of something heavy being lowered. "They're moving gear," Harlo murmured. "Diving operations." Diving operations. The phrase tightened Rachel like a hand around her throat. That was the thing she had feared. Not that Blackwood wanted to plunder a relic, greed was a predictable motivator, but that he'd sent men comfortable with water. Men who would find the cave if they were given time. "Mike," she said quietly, eyes on the map where 3 red marks glared like fresh wounds. "He's starting." The man who'd once rigged charges under bridges smiled without humor. "Time to be spectacularly noisy," he replied. They split to their secondary tasks. Freeman and Mike slipped into the tree line, setting up an array of small charges, non-lethal but loud enough to draw men away from the banks. The plan was messy because they wanted it to be. Blackwood expected cold, clinical theft. He did not expect theater. Carlos and Harlo monitored the feed counting movement, adjusting the chessboard by the second. At midnight, Mike created the first explosion. It was a flash of light and a concussive roar that shook the leaves and sent dogs barking into the night. Men ran toward the noise, soldiers with habits drilled into them from years of following commands. The trailers emptied like lungs. Harlo signaled. Rachel moved to the river on a small inflatable the team had prepared. She had worked in worse conditions, cold Afghan nights where the only warmth was the thought of home. But fear is an equalizer. She felt it now, a thin thread of it that sharpened all the senses. With every paddle stroke, she sent the small craft gliding toward the dark mouth of the river where the currents thinned. Their entry point lay hidden beneath a knuckle of rocks, a narrow fold in the bank that swallowed sound. The river was a living thing in the night, tugging and shaping around the hull. Each breath in her rebreather tasted like ozone and old knives. Her hands were steady because they had to be. Her heart was steady because she had told it to be. They slipped close to the cave entrance. Harlo's light caught the outline of diving gear, 2 wetsuits, tanks, a pile of tethers. Someone had come prepared. She could feel the cold coral of panic at that discovery. It knifed through relief like a second, sharper cold. The enemy was advanced enough to bring real diving teams. They had crossed a line. They surfaced several hundred meters downstream to the planned extraction point, where Mike and Freeman waited in the shadows. The tracker devices pinged silently in their ears as they relayed coordinates. The team moved with the efficiency of people who had rehearsed improbable moves in the theater of memory until they were automatic. "Carlos, watch the East Ridge," Rachel whispered into the earpiece. "If they head upstream, we fall on them from the bank." "Copy," Carlos answered, his voice a calm blade. They split once more, Harlo and Rachel to the western approach, Mike and Freeman circling to the north to cut routes of retreat. The sky bled into a thin sheet of purple, and the river's surface turned pewter. It was beautiful in a way that made Rachel furious. Beauty had no moral allegiance. It only existed to be observed and sometimes to betray. They found them not where they had expected. A small team near the far bank, heads bent over nodes, hands pressing tethers into the river like surgeons sewing wounds. The first exchange was a whisper, a flash of the muzzle, a dark spray of water as someone missed a heartbeat. Then the world opened up. Gunfire was never as clean as film made it. It was a violent punctuation, a string of small betrayals. Bullets thudded into trees, the night filled with the staccato language of impact. One of Blackwood's men tried to run with the reel that anchored the divers. Mike was on him with the speed of a man who had no time for apologies. The man went down, cursing in a language Rachel didn't speak but recognized by tone, fear and surprise. They moved like hunters, quick and merciless where necessary, bending rules because rules belonged to the enemy now. They pushed their advantage, pushing perimeters, forcing the enemy to reveal their contingency. A second team poured out of the trailers, larger, trained men whose eyes wore the same flat, efficient lethality that had once served nations. Rachel's muscles remembered the cadence of command: suppress, flank, isolate. She moved like a thought, closing distance, then finding cover. She felt Harlo at her shoulder as if he were a shadow of intent, not an old man in a cheap jacket. When the firefight broke into hand-to-hand, it became ugly and personal. Men hit the earth and screamed. The river took witnesses and washed them clean of the world, leaving only the echo of what had happened. Rachel's hands found a throat. For a long second she heard only blood and breath, then the man's resistance went slack. When she stepped back, her gloves were slick with mud and the dark, iron tang of fear. They won their skirmish with cost. Not noble, not glorious, just effective. Mike limped slightly, a shallow grimace cutting the smile from his mouth. Freeman had taken a glancing hit to the forearm. Bandages later would hide the truth. One of Blackwood's divers had sunk into the river and not come up. No one said his name. The river did not care. They found something else on the bank as the adrenaline thinned. A scrap of fabric with stitching the color of a flag she'd seen on old dossiers. It wasn't civilian. It was a signpost. This fight was bigger than a single man's greed. It involved networks, past allegiances wrapped in modern dollars. Rachel felt the vertigo of scale, how small their patch of resolve was compared to the web Blackwood represented. Back at the ridge, the devices hummed. Harlo's face was a map of decision. "They're rerouting," he said. "They'll try the eastern approach now. Expect more divers at dawn." "Then we take the river before they do," Rachel said. The words felt like a vow more than a plan. They exfiltrated the area in the hush after the storm, the kind of silence that follows a seizure of breath. Mike set charges that blew a different kind of message. Equipment destroyed, divees delayed, the show of force that buys them hours. The men who had fought for money now had to tend to the wounds money could not fix in a hurry. Back at the cabin, in the thin gray that passed for morning, they counted their damage. People who had the habit of surviving had a particular way of tallying, a list with names, a map with points, a rhythm with which grief could be parceled into tasks. Rachel felt each small cut like a ledger entry. She recorded them mentally and then pushed away the feeling because it was work now. Staying alive was work, not sentiment. Carlos cleaned a wound and hummed under his breath, a tune that was not a prayer but it steadied them. Freeman slept in a chair for 20 minutes and then woke, immediately resuming his post like clockwork. Mike curled something in his hand, a locket or a stone, and smiled at it for a beat that belonged to some other life. Rachel stood by the window and watched the river. The day held a brittle promise, black clouds on the horizon, the distant throb of helicopter blades that could mean reinforcements or merely weather. The trackers had shown movement. Blackwood's convoy had shifted, recalculated. He was not a man who accepted defeat easily. She unfolded David's letter from a pocket, smoothing the worn paper with a hand that trembled just once. The river keeps secrets, Harp. It knows how to hide things. Remember that. She had remembered. The memory was a small comfort and now a challenge. Could they keep the secret safe longer than Blackwood could hunt it? A ping came through on the surveillance feed, unexpected, wrong. A signal from upstream, a camera they hadn't planned for. Harlo's eyes narrowed. "They've got a new source," he said. "Not ours." He glanced at Rachel with a look that was both apology and warning. Beyond the ridge, the river folded its hands and waited. The hunt had gotten louder, so had the consequences. They were out of time. Why did the river feel different tonight? Rachel couldn't explain it, only that it hummed in her bones like a warning. She stood on the bank with her rifle slung, the mist curling around her boots, her breath steady but her pulse refusing to obey. Somewhere upstream, Blackwood's men were moving. The trackers told them that much. But it wasn't just logistics now. It was something else, something she couldn't shake. Harlo joined her, his steps soundless on the damp earth. "They've shifted patterns," he said. "Convoy rerouted. Guards doubled on the east bank. Blackwood doesn't waste men unless he's close." Rachel's jaw tightened. Close to what? He didn't answer. He didn't need to. The unspoken truth lay heavy between them. Blackwood was nearing the device, the secret buried in the riverbed, the one her brother had once sworn was just rumor until rumor turned into death. The team gathered in the cabin, maps spread across the table under the dim light. Mike traced a finger along the ridges. "East Bank puts him here. Only thing worth guarding in that sector is the cave system." Freeman grunted. "And if he's got divers ready, he'll hit the waterline before sunrise." Rachel studied the topography. The cave was narrow, invisible to most, accessible only through a choke point the river tried to keep hidden. She had found it once by accident, following a hawk's shadow along the cliffs. David had written about it later in a letter. Some places keep their own secrets. Harp may be better than people do. She looked up, voice firm. "We can't let him inside." Mike leaned back, smirk fatting. "You mean we blow it?" "Not yet," Rachel said. "We don't even know if the device is there. We can't risk detonation without confirmation." The silence that followed was thick. They all knew the stakes. If Blackwood retrieved the nuke, the fallout wasn't just tactical. It was global. But if they destroyed the cave prematurely, without proof, they risked unleashing the very thing they swore to prevent. Carlos broke the silence, calm as ever. "Then we need eyes inside first. Quiet fast before they get there." Rachel met his gaze, then Harlo. "I'll go." Harlo frowned. "Too risky alone." "I know those currents," she argued. "The choke point's narrow. Two people will make noise. One can slip through." "You're not expendable," he said, voice low, not command but something closer. Rachel held his stare. "Neither are you, but we both know someone has to risk it." The decision hung, heavy as the river itself. Finally Harlo nodded once. "Fine, but you stay tethered. We'll hold the line out here." The water was colder than she remembered. Not icy, not numbing, just alive in a way that wrapped around her skin like memory. Every stroke carried her closer to the cave's mouth, her rebreather steadying the rhythm of her breath. Above her, the stars blurred against the current's reflection. Inside, darkness folded over her. The entrance narrowed, water pressing against rock until it felt like the cave itself was testing her resolve. She forced herself through, body slim against the stone, trusting the rope at her waist to hold if the current tried to drag her back. She emerged into a chamber where the ceiling rose above the waterline. She surfaced silently, light barely skimming the walls. And there it was. Metal. Not much, just the edge of a casing protruding from the silt, half swallowed by decades of sediment. Faded stenciling still visible under her beam, U.S. Army. The numbers below it scraped away by time, but there was no mistaking it. The rumors weren't rumors. Her chest tightened. This wasn't just a weapon. This was the kind of thing men built wars around, and it had been waiting here untouched while the world spun above it unaware. She wanted to stay, wanted to memorize every detail, but instinct screamed, leave. She killed her light, slipped back beneath the surface, and let the current carry her out. She broke the surface downstream, gasping into the night air. Harlo was there, pulling her onto the bank with a strength that belied his years. The others crowded close, eyes searching hers. "Well," Mike demanded. Rachel's voice was steady, but her hands trembled as she stripped the rebreather from her face. "It's real." The silence that followed was unlike the others. This one carried weight, a finality none of them wanted. The device existed. Blackwood was close, and their window to stop him had shrunk to hours, maybe less. Freeman cursed under his breath. Mike slammed a fist into the dirt. Carlos only exhaled softly, as though he had expected this truth all along. Harlo studied her face, then spoke what none of them wanted to hear. "If it's real, we can't just stop Blackwood. We have to make sure no one ever touches it again." Rachel felt the words strike like stone. Destroy it, seal it forever. But how, without triggering the very nightmare they feared? Her brother's voice echoed in her memory. "The river keeps secrets, Harp. It knows how to hide things." Maybe the answer wasn't destruction. Maybe it was burial. But before she could speak it, the night erupted. Gunfire tore through the trees, sharp and sudden. Muzzle flashes lit the ridge. Blackwood's men had found them. Rachel dropped behind the rocks, rifle up, instinct slamming back into her veins. The others moved just as fast, Freeman hauling Mike down by the collar, Carlos already firing back with precision bursts. Harlo crouched beside her, eyes narrow, voice calm even as the world cracked open. "He knows we're here." Rachel's breath caught. Blackwood wasn't just close, he was hunting them now. And the river was no longer a secret. It was a battlefield. Why did the bullets always sound sharper at night? Rachel thought it might be the way darkness wrapped around each shot, amplifying fear, making every echo feel like it carried straight to the bone. She pressed herself into the dirt, rifle braced against her shoulder, eyes searching for targets in the fractured light of muzzle flashes across the ridge. Blackwood's men were disciplined. Not the wild chaos of mercenaries bought cheap, but soldiers, methodical, precise. They laid down suppressive fire, trying to pin the team against the riverbank. Harlo crouched beside her, voice calm through the storm. "They want us boxed in. Don't give them the choke." Rachel's breath steadied. She scanned the tree line, caught the glint of a scope, and squeezed. The recoil was familiar, comforting. The glint vanished. One less set of eyes hunting them. To her left, Mike grunted, blood soaking through his sleeve. Freeman dragged him behind a log, returning fire with a sharp, angry rhythm. Carlos's shots cracked clean and measured, cutting through the enemy advance like a scalpel. Rachel felt the old weight pressing down, the same helplessness she had known in Helmand, when David's voice had cut out over comms. The same sound of men falling, one by one, because someone had betrayed them. Her throat burned, but she forced the feeling into the stock of her rifle, into each controlled squeeze of the trigger. She would not let it happen again. The firefight stretched, brutal and close. A grenade landed meters from their cover. Freeman lunged, grabbing it, hurling it back over the ridge with a roar that tore through his chest. The explosion lit the night, a shockwave slamming through the trees. For a second, the firing stopped. Rachel seized the pause. "Move," she shouted, pushing Harlo toward the bank. They shifted, sliding position, using the smoke as cover. She felt splinters of wood slice her cheek, a sting reminding her just how thin the line was between alive and not. They regrouped behind a boulder near the dock. Mike's face was pale, his grin gone, but his eyes still fierce. "They're probing us," he hissed. "Not a full assault, just keeping us busy." Rachel's stomach sank. He was right. Blackwood didn't waste men on distractions unless. Her eyes widened. "The cave. He's sending the real team to the cave." Harlo's gaze locked with hers, hard as steel. "Then we split." "No," she snapped. "That's what he wants. Divide us, bleed us out, we hold together." The team looked at her, waiting. For years she'd been the one in the shadows, the one overlooked at briefing tables. Now the decision hung on her words. She swallowed hard, pulse pounding. "We push through," she said. "Force them to fall back. Then we go to the cave before he gets there." It was madness. But it was also the only path that didn't end with Blackwood walking out of the river with history's worst ghost in his hands. Harlo nodded once, a flicker of something, respect maybe crossing his face. "On your call." Rachel inhaled, then signaled. Freeman laid down heavy fire covering the advance. Carlos picked targets clean, thinning the line. Rachel moved like the river itself, silent, relentless, cutting through gaps. She felt the old training take over, her body moving before thought, every step a rhythm of survival. They broke the flank. Blackwood's men faltered, retreating into the trees. Rachel held her aim steady until the last shadow melted back into the ridge. Silence returned, ragged and uneasy, broken only by the hiss of the river against stone. Mike cursed softly, clutching his arm. Carlos was already on him, bandaging, steady hands working with the care of someone who had saved lives in worse places. Freeman wiped blood from his brow, unbothered by the shallow cut it came from. Harlo reloaded, eyes scanning the horizon. Rachel stood, chest heaving. The night smelled of cordite and river mist. Her heart thudded, not with fear but with the weight of what came next. "They'll be at the cave by sunrise," she said. "Then we'll be there first," Harlo answered. Rachel's gaze drifted to the water. She thought of David's letter, of the words that had anchored her through every dark year since his death. "The river keeps secrets, Harp." But secrets didn't last forever, not when men like Blackwood hunted them. She felt the choice press against her chest like a second heartbeat. Destroy the device and risk unleashing it, or bury it deeper, trust the river to guard it longer than any human ever could. Neither option promised survival, both promised sacrifice. As dawn bled into the horizon, Rachel knew the decision would not wait. And for the first time since her brother's death, she realized, this wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about what kind of secret she was willing to leave the world. Who was he really, Marcus Blackwood? Rachel asked herself as she tightened the straps on her vest. A man who sold his brothers for money. A man who vanished into shadows and returned dressed as a businessman. Or was he something worse? A believer. Someone who thought himself chosen to wield what should never exist. The ridge was gray with dawn when they moved. Mist clung low, blurring edges, disguising motion. Rachel led, Harlo at her shoulder, the others strung in silence behind. Their boots barely disturbed the wet soil, but her chest ached with each step. She knew the cave was waiting, and she knew Blackwood was already inside. They reached the outcrop where the river narrowed, the water frothing white between jagged rock. Rachel crouched low, pointing toward the east bank. A cluster of men stood guard there, faces half hidden beneath hoods. Their stances were too sharp to belong to locals. Carlos whispered, "They've already put divers in." Rachel's stomach sank. "Then we're late." "Not too late," Harlo said. His eyes flicked across the guards, his mind already mapping angles and timing. "We cut them out fast, then we follow." Rachel hesitated. For years she had carried orders, never given them. But last night the choice had been hers, and now they waited for her again. She exhaled slowly. "Carlos, high perch, take the leftmost. Freeman, Mike, you push right. Harlo with me." The world shrank into seconds. A signal with her hand, a crack of a rifle. The first guard dropped, sound swallowed by river roar. Freeman and Mike charged, gunfire erupting sharp and brutal. Rachel and Harlo advanced through the chaos, moving like dancers through a choreography written in blood. 2 minutes, maybe less. The guards were down, the bank was theirs. Rachel's eyes locked on the river. Ropes stretched taut into the water, bubbles breaking the surface where Blackwood's divers had vanished below. She stripped her gear fast, rebreather, waterproof light, knife strapped to her thigh. Harlo mirrored her, his movements steady despite the years. Their eyes met, a silent agreement. "If I don't come back," Rachel began. "Don't finish that," Harlo cut her off. "You're coming back." She wanted to believe him. Instead, she took one last look at the men behind them. Carlos steady as stone, Freeman bleeding but unbowed, Mike smirking through the pain. Then she turned to the river and Dove. The water closed over her like a fist, cold, dark, alive. The rope led downward into the black, every pull drawing her closer to the heart of what Blackwood wanted. Her chest tightened, lungs straining against the regulator. She pushed forward anyway. The cave mouth loomed ahead, jagged rock swallowing light. She slid through the choke, body scraping stone, heart hammering with the claustrophobia of death pressing from all sides. Then space. A chamber opening wide, waterline breaking into air. She surfaced in silence. Her light flicked across stone slick with centuries of moisture, and then she saw them. Blackwood's divers. 3 men, pulling at the silt, clearing decades of sediment from a metal shell that glowed dull in the beam. The casing was larger than she remembered from training manuals, but the stenciling was unmistakable. W-54, Special Atomic Demolition Munition. And above them, standing on a rock shelf like a man surveying his throne, was Blackwood. Older, yes. Hair silver, face cut with lines of comfort earned by betrayal, but his presence was unchanged. He radiated command, his eyes sharp as broken glass as they caught her light. "Well," he said, his voice echoing against the chamber walls, "the ghost's little sister." Her breath caught. He knew her. He had known all along. "You think you're here to stop me," he continued, stepping closer to the edge. "No, you're here to witness, to understand what men like me do when history buries power. We dig it up." Her rifle was steady, sights fixed on his chest, but her finger wouldn't pull, not yet, because behind him the divers hauled at the device, straining to free it from the mud. One wrong shot, one stray spark, and the cave would become their tomb. Blackwood saw her hesitation. He smiled. "That's the difference between us. You hesitate, I don't." His hand lifted, a signal. One of the divers reached for a weapon. Rachel fired, the diver dropped, chaos tore through the chamber. She dove sideways, water splashing as bullets cracked against stone. Harlo surfaced behind her, returning fire with sharp bursts. The cave echoed with violence, the sound magnified until it felt like thunder. Rachel moved on instinct, low, fast, precise. She clipped another diver, then rolled behind cover, her breath ragged inside the rebreather mask. Blackwood remained calm even as his men fell. He crouched beside the device, hand resting on its casing as though it were an altar. "Do you know what this means?" he called over the gunfire. "This isn't destruction, it's rebirth, a new balance, power that answers to no nation, only to those who dare claim it." His words slithered into her chest, pressing against the guilt and grief she had carried since David. Was this how men like him justified betrayal? By calling it destiny? No, she shouted back. It's death, and you've already traded enough lives for it. Her rifle barked again. Another diver collapsed. Only Blackwood remained, crouched beside the weapon like a priest before his god. For a moment time stilled. The cave breathed silence heavy and sacred. Rachel's finger tightened on the trigger. She could end him now. End all of it. But she saw the wires, the detonator rigged beneath the casing. Her breath froze. He had booby-trapped it. One wrong shot and they would all vanish in a flash brighter than memory. Blackwood smiled, reading her face. You see, even in death I win. Her pulse thundered. Her brother's voice whispered in her mind. The river keeps secrets, Harp, trust it. Not destruction, not now, not here. She lowered the rifle an inch, shifting her aim. Not at the device, not at Blackwood, but at the ropes holding the casing steady against the diver's rig. She fired. The rope snapped. The current surged. The device slid, swallowed by silt, dragged deeper into the cave's throat. Blackwood's smile shattered as he lunged, reaching for it, screaming as the river pulled his prize away into the darkness. Harlo's shots cracked in the chaos, forcing Blackwood to dive for cover. Rachel's hands shook, but her voice was steady as she called to him across the cavern. You wanted to dig up history, she said, but the river keeps its own secrets. Blackwood's eyes burned, but for the first time Rachel saw something else flicker there. Not power, not control. Desperation. And that was when she knew this fight wasn't over. Not yet. What did desperation do to a man like Marcus Blackwood? Rachel had always believed it stripped away the polish, left only raw greed underneath. But watching him claw at the disappearing ropes, lunging toward the river's throat as though he could wrestle back history itself, she saw something uglier, conviction. He didn't just want the weapon, he believed he was owed it. Gunfire echoed in the cave. Harlo's voice cut through the chaos. Move. Rachel dove back into the water, kicking hard toward the choke point. Bullets sliced through the surface, chasing her in silver streaks. The cave pressed around her, stones scraping her shoulders as she forced herself through. For a terrifying second, the current caught her, threatening to pin her against the wall. Then Harlo's hand shoved her forward, the tether line taut between them. They burst into the open river together, gasping air that tasted like survival. The others were waiting. Carlos laid down cover fire from the ridge, precision shots cracking through the dawn haze. Freeman's voice barked through the comms, sharp and steady despite exhaustion. Mike, pale but unbowed, manned the heavy rifle from their perch. Their fire kept Blackwood's men pinned at the cave mouth long enough for Rachel and Harlo to drag themselves to the bank. They'll chase, Harlo said, chest heaving. Rachel wiped water from her face, heart still pounding. Then we don't give them a trail. She wanted to sound resolute, but inside she felt the weight of what had just happened. She hadn't destroyed the device. She hadn't killed Blackwood. She had buried the problem deeper, trusting the river to guard it longer. Was that wisdom or cowardice? David's voice echoed in her chest. The river keeps secrets, Harp. But for how long? By midday they were on the move again. Freeman insisted on finding higher ground. Too many trails led back to the cabin now. They climbed into the ridge country, packs heavy, boots grinding against stone. The air grew thinner, the silence more brittle. At a clearing they rested. Carlos checked Mike's wound, tightening the bandage with a gentleness that seemed out of place in this brutal landscape. Freeman scanned the horizon, muttering about patrol patterns. Harlo leaned against a rock, face unreadable, eyes half closed as though mapping every possible next move. Rachel sat apart, rifle across her knees, staring at the river winding far below. She remembered David's handwriting, the slant of his letters, the way he had always ended his notes with, "Don't let the silence win, Harp." But silence was winning, not the kind you found in forests or rivers, the silence inside her, the one that whispered she had failed. Harlo's voice broke it. You did the right thing. She didn't look at him. Did I? It's still there. He'll try again. He'll never stop. He shifted, lowering himself beside her. His presence was solid, grounding. You kept the world from burning today. Sometimes that's the only victory we get. She shook her head. I don't want just today. He was quiet for a long time. Then, neither did I in Helmand. I wanted more than one day. I wanted justice. But all I got was survival, and I've lived long enough to know survival is its own kind of justice. Rachel turned toward him then. His eyes were tired, yes, but also steady. He carried the same ghost she did, but somehow he had learned to live beside them instead of beneath them. Maybe that was the difference. Night fell hard. They camped in silence, a fireless circle beneath the stars. Freeman dozed with his rifle in his lap. Mike muttered curses in his sleep, dreams haunted by wounds he pretended didn't matter. Carlos sat cross-legged, eyes closed, whispering prayers that belonged to no church Rachel knew. She stayed awake, listening, always listening. Near midnight, the faint crunch of boots reached her ears, not from her team, from the ridge. She signaled silently. Harlo was already awake, rifle raised. The others stirred, weapons sliding into hands. Figures emerged from the trees, 3 men, then 5, then more. Not Blackwood's usual mercenaries. These moved quieter, cleaner, professional. Their weapons gleamed in the starlight. Rachel's stomach dropped. Not his men, she whispered. Then whose? Freeman asked. The answer came a moment later. A voice, low and sharp, carried across the clearing. O&I, stand down. Rachel froze. Office of Naval Intelligence. Her office. The same institution she had abandoned, the same people who had buried the file she had stolen. A woman stepped into the clearing, night vision goggles pushed up, eyes cutting straight to Rachel. You were ordered to leave this alone, and now you've dragged ghosts out of the river. Rachel's throat tightened. She opened her mouth, but no words came. Harlo stepped in front of her, rifle steady. You're late. Blackwood's already here. The woman's gaze flicked to him, unimpressed. Then we'll handle him. This operation is compromised. You're done. Rachel's pulse hammered. Done? After everything. After David, after the river, after Blackwood's men. No, she couldn't be done. Not while the device still existed. Not while Blackwood was still breathing. Her voice came out low, sharp. If you think you can control this, you're a fool. The river doesn't answer to you, and neither do I. The O&I officer's expression didn't change, but her silence was answer enough. They weren't here to help. They were here to contain, to erase. Rachel felt the old burn rise in her chest, the anger of being ignored, sidelined, dismissed. Not this time. Not again. She gripped her rifle tighter, eyes locked on the officer. We finish this, my way. The officer tilted her head, almost curious. And if we don't let you? Rachel didn't blink. Then you'll have to stop me. The clearing went still. 2 forces balanced on the edge of a blade, loyalty to orders and loyalty to the truth. And somewhere in the shadows, Rachel knew Blackwood was still moving, still hunting. The war wasn't between nations anymore. It was between those who wanted to bury secrets and those willing to guard them, no matter the cost. Why did endings never feel like endings? Rachel asked herself as dawn broke over the ridge. The river shimmered below, golden in the new light, hiding its horrors beneath the surface. To the townspeople waking miles away, it was just water. To her, it was a graveyard, a secret, a war. The O&I officer stood rigid at the clearing's edge, her team spread wide, rifles lowered but ready. Harlo leaned against a boulder, calm on the surface but coiled beneath. Freeman shifted his weight, ready to fight anyone who pushed too close. Carlos stood steady, eyes narrowed. Mike winced against his wound but refused to leave the line. Rachel at the center felt every gaze on her, not just the O&I officers or her team. She felt her brothers. David, somewhere in the silence, waiting to see what she would do. "You're out of your depth," the officer said coldly. "This isn't a personal crusade, it's national security." Rachel's voice cut back, sharp as glass. National security buried that device, ignored it, pretended it didn't exist. That's how Blackwood got here. "Enough," the woman snapped. "Stand down, this operation is classified now." Rachel almost laughed. Classified. The word that had killed David. The word that had buried every name on the list Blackwood sold. Classified was just another way to say forgotten. Harlo stepped closer, voice low but firm. "She's not standing down, neither am I." The standoff stretched, tense as wire. Then crack. A single shot split the morning. One of the O&I men dropped, blood blooming against his vest. The ridge erupted in chaos. Blackwood's men stormed from the tree line, rifles barking, grenades hurling dirt skyward. He hadn't fled the cave. He had followed, stalked, waited for both sides to weaken each other. Now he came for all of them. Rachel dove for cover, adrenaline burning away hesitation. The O&I team broke formation, some firing back, others scrambling. Freeman unleashed a torrent of fire, his booming curses rising with each shot. Mike, pale and grim, steadied his weapon and cut down a charging mercenary with ruthless precision. Carlos dragged an O&I man to safety even as he kept firing, his calm voice steady against the storm. And Blackwood, Rachel saw him through the chaos. Moving like a predator, weaving between cover, his eyes locked on her. Their gazes met, and in that instant she knew this was never about the nuke. Not really. That was power, yes, but power is useless without someone to chase it. This was about him, his belief that betrayal could be destiny. He raised his rifle, she raised hers. The world slowed, breath in, breath out, the memory of David's voice. "Don't let the silence win, Harp." Her shot cracked first. His rifle clattered against the rock. He staggered, clutching his chest, eyes wide not with pain but disbelief. He fell. The firefight raged around them, but Rachel heard nothing. Just the river, steady and eternal, whispering against stone. She moved through the smoke, boots finding his body. He was still breathing, faint and ragged. His hand reached toward her, trembling. "You don't understand," he gasped. "Power, it was mine." Rachel crouched, her face close to his. Her voice was quiet, steady. "No, it never was." His eyes dulled. His hand fell. And Marcus Blackwood, betrayer of her brother, thief of lives, hunter of ghosts, was gone. The silence that followed was brutal. Gunfire dwindled. Survivors staggered to their feet. O&I swept the ridge, rounding up the last of Blackwood's mercenaries. Freeman slumped against a rock, muttering that he needed a drink stronger than blood. Mike spat dirt and laughed, bitter but alive. Carlos's hands were already working, binding wounds, saving what could be saved. Rachel stood apart. The river glittered below, untouched, indifferent. Somewhere beneath the device still lay, still waiting. The O&I officer approached, her face pale, hardened by what she had just witnessed. "You should have let us handle it." Rachel turned, her eyes sharp. "You would have lost, you almost did." The officer said nothing. There was no argument left. Harlo came to her side, silent for a long moment before he spoke. "You know this isn't the end. That thing is still down there. One day someone else will come looking." Rachel nodded. "Then one day someone else will have to be ready." He studied her, eyes steady. "You." Her gaze drifted to the water. For years she had carried grief like an anchor. Today, for the first time, it felt like a weapon, a purpose. "Maybe me," she said softly. The team gathered what they could, tended to the wounded, prepared for the long road out. O&I would write their reports, bury their truths. The world would never know how close it had come. But Rachel knew. As the sun climbed higher, she stood on the ridge, wind tugging at her braid, eyes fixed on the river below. She thought of David, his laughter, his letters, his final silence. She thought of Blackwood lying still in the dirt. She thought of the secret still sleeping in the depths. And when she finally spoke, her voice was quiet but steady enough to carry. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts. The river flowed on, carrying secrets it would never tell.